Hello, so this is going to be our first video actually going over one of our lessons in the glacial geomorphology unit that I've put together. If this is the first video you're watching, I would highly recommend going back and watching the intro video. It's going to explain how these lessons kind of fit into like a semester long or a year long plan. It's going to be more beneficial, and these other videos are going to make sense if you watch that one. So it should be grouped nearby with this video. If not, like I said, first video, first lesson, we've got... this is going to be our initial engagement activity that's really going to introduce the unit. So what I have for you here is here's the hard lesson plan and then some resources I've included for you. We can go over those and after we go over this real quick or during it. What we have here is this first lesson is a little unique because there's two different ways you can do it, and it really is dependent on where you're at in the country. If you live in the Iowa Great Lakes, there's a way I would recommend doing this. And if you don't live in the Iowa Great Lakes region, there's the other way you can do it, or just depending on the resources you have. So let's just dive right in. So this first lesson is going to be a way to get students invested, get them involved, and then for you as the teacher to gain insight into students' prior knowledge. It's going to let you know, all right, if they do have that foundations of geology, how much of it do they remember? What are they trying to put to play in this lesson? If they don't, this is going to give you an idea of what have they heard on YouTube or watching documentaries or whatnot. So like I said, there's two ways to do this. This is going to be a tour of glacial features. The idea is to show students these glacial features and evidence of glaciation in the state, and then trying to get them to figure out how it happened, what happened, all of that good stuff without giving it away. You want to see what's percolating in their mind first. So there's two ways to do it. The first way is if you're in the Iowa Great Lakes region and you have the resources, do a field trip. It's the best way for them to truly experience, okay, how big are some of these formations? What does this truly mean when we're talking about a glacier, a sheet of ice? Like, in order for these things to form, it had to be huge. And that's going to become kind of the realization they have by going to some of these places. So if you can, get out there. It's a great trip. You can do it in about the better part of half a day, maybe a little over that after lunch. You can get to all the sites that I've put on here and their locations fairly easily with either a bus or a few passenger vans, depending on how big your class is and the resources your schools have to provide for you. So the way I divided it out is this first section kind of gives an idea of what the lesson is. This second section here, I have the lesson objectives and goals, NGSS practices. All of those are going to be contained in the Annex A that's in the overall unit plan. So look at that if you have any questions about what might go into that. But this is, like I said, for you to gain access to their prior knowledge. As far as background info that's kind of needed, like I said in the first video, general geology for your students is going to be fairly key in order for them to understand the rest of this. Otherwise, it's just going to kind of be a jumbled mess and a little difficult for them. As far as a teacher's standpoint of background knowledge, I've got some different things for you. You're going to probably want to, if you're not familiar with glacial geomorphology or it's been a while, brush up on it. I've included a couple of resources here. You've got this one, which is from the Iowa GIS. It's going to talk about the Des Moines lobe, which was the last period of glaciation, some of those features, and then some different sites you could go to. We'll get into that in a little bit here, but this is a great resource. It's a fairly quick read. They have access to more resources from that, which is why I just included this one. It's good stuff. The other really good one is Landforms of Iowa by Gene C. Pryor. It is kind of an older book. I want to say it was like early 90s. So it's better, almost pushing 30 years old now. It's still really good. Tons of information, not just about the glaciation of Iowa, but all of it in general. Definitely one to have in your classroom if you're going to be doing more of geology in Iowa. If you're teaching in Iowa, it's a good read too. Nice part is despite the fact it's around 30 years old, most of the geology in Iowa really hasn't changed that much in 30 years. So it's worth it. You can probably find it at a library or through the DNR online for pretty cheap and get a collection or a couple of them for your school. So that would be good for you to brush up on. Both of these resources I would kind of not make known to your students right away because you don't want them figuring things out before you do it, because then it kind of takes away from the lesson. Keep a hold of these though, because it's going to be really helpful for your students when they start doing research in the later lessons. So as far as materials needed, if you do the physical tour, you're probably going to need buses or passenger vans, and probably like food and water if you do the better part of the day, maybe some lunch or snacks. For the virtual tour, that's the other version of it where you're going to be getting on the internet, looking up these sites on either Google Earth or just Google Images and taking a look at them, and then having the students make observations that way. I also have some images that you can use. Whether you do the virtual or the physical tour, they're going to be helpful because a lot of them were shot from an airplane, so you get good overhead aerial images that aren't satellite like Google Earth, because Google Earth can sometimes you're just too high up, and so you can't really feel what it looks like. These ones you get a little bit closer. It's a little different perspective. So use those for either one. But you students are going to need internet in whatever case they end up using. Excuse me. All right. And then as far as pre-assessment is concerned, this lesson is the pre-assessment, and we'll get into that in just a second. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be explaining to students that they're going to be visiting or observing different locations. Let them know up front that they should be generating questions about these locations or what they think. Make note, whether that's electronically, if you're doing the virtual tour, if they're typing it up on a Word doc or a Google doc, or bringing out a field notebook if you're going out to and actually visiting all these places. Have them write it down. That's crucial. Take time at those locations to actually write things down. And we'll get into what they're looking for here in a second. So here I have the locations that I would recommend. These are all in the Iowa Great Lakes region. It's not too far away. It's within probably around a county out as far as it'll go from Dickinson County, the surrounding area. Frida Hafner, Kettle Hole. Also on the right for all of these, I've included the technical term for what it is. So you got kettle hole, a came, esker, stuff like that. Try not to let your students know what the technical term is beforehand. You want them to kind of develop what they think it is and then give them the term later. If they know it, that's fine. If they see it, that's fine. It works better, though, if they don't really know what it is or what to call it. Because they might just think it's like a hill or something like that. So like Ochita Mound really does look like a big old hill, but it's a came, and a came is very different and forms different than a hill sometimes. So there are some differences. So have them look up these areas or visit these areas. The reason I did include what they are, though, is let's say you can't find Silver Lake Fen on Google Earth. I know it's actually really hard unless you zoom in right on it. Just look up a fen. And if you can, as the teacher, put it on the projector. Don't really let them see that it's called a fen. Just be like, all right, what does this look like? And have them tell you about it. So these are all the different sites. I've included, I say, aerial photos here. That's all the photos that are going to come with this that I've taken during my time up in the area. All of the site, for all of them, have students record their observations. If you're doing the physical tour, tell them to bring their phones. Tell them to take pictures. That's going to be a huge advantage later on that you guys are going to have over the virtual tour. Virtual tour, have them record observations, have them copy the image and put it in like a PowerPoint or a Word doc so they have access of it again, or at the very least the web address, and talk about, have them make notes of it. Students should really be doing the following things on all of them. Making predictions about how the location formed, because it's going to give you kind of an idea of how they think glaciers work. They might not even know these are caused by glaciers at first. How does water interact with the terrain? Because that's going to help lead us to our big underlying question of how does the geologic setting impact the flow of water and contaminants? So that's a huge question. What does the soil look like underneath? Because that kind of ties in with that other one. Here I got some examples. Have them describe the terrain feature. What's it look like? What's the characteristics? Because an esker is going to be different than a prairie pothole and all of that stuff. You want to see what they're noticing, what the differences are. And then how old are the features? Because you're really, along with that, this is the last stuff that's really happened geologically as far as a big thing within the past like 30,000 years or so. This is a possible misconception. Students might think that it's older than it really is and how it forms. So that's why I throw that one in there. As far as the teacher's concerned, make sure you have all the images and locations saved so you can use them in follow-on lessons. This is probably going to take maybe 1 to 2 class periods. If you're doing the bus tour or the actual physical tour, it's going to take better part of the day. If you're doing the online version, the virtual tour, it could take, a day just to look at all the sites and have students write down observations. Another day for them to kind of gather their thoughts and compare with one another. That's going to be this negotiation section. Really have students compare what they observe. What are they noticing that their peers are noticing or what they're not noticing? It's a great opportunity for them to converse and really learn from each other. And then share as a class. Also, the big part of that when they share as a class is questions. What questions are they developing? What do they think's going on? Put that together as a class and get access to that, because that's an example of their knowledge, their models, their thoughts. So get an example of that if you can. Write it down on a whiteboard, on a piece of butcher block as the teacher, as a class. And then the next part for you, aside from being able to take a look at their observations and stuff, whether it's electronic or hard copy from the field notebooks, is put together a completion survey. This can be done either written or electronic. I didn't put together an electronic one because on Google Docs sometimes there's some difficulty sharing it with people, depending on how many people this ends up making its way out to. I didn't want to have to reshare every single time. So I just left it up to you to how you want to make it. Everyone has their own preferences. But the big questions I would suggest asking is, what do you know about Iowa's geological history? See what the kids know already. How far down is Iowa's bedrock? That's going to tie into it. What is Iowa's bedrock made out of? And then what questions do you have? Because a kid might have a question that they didn't want to pose to the entire class. This is an opportunity for them to ask it and for you to take a look at it and maybe see if that's if it's a really big question, a really good question, you might want to pose it to the class. I'd add maybe a couple of these. Let them know that this is completely formative. You're not trying to grade them on any of this. You're just trying to learn about your students at this point. And then for the teacher, do a after action review, reflective learning. What went well? What didn't? What do you want to include next time? What do you want to take out for next time? Those are all things that are going to help make the lesson go smoother for you. Please send me those comments, either email or comment on this YouTube video, things you would change or improve. It's just going to help me and other teachers that might use this, so I'd really appreciate that. I just kind of wrote down what I would do for it. So what I kind of envision, obviously before this, there's really not much other than the fact that they need to have their foundations of geology. Where I see this going later is, depending on what the students are writing, what they're observing, the teacher is then going to have to make a judgment call on how they want to formulate the next lesson. So for day 3 and 4, you could really put together, okay, going over the what the formations are, how they form, what the names are, building up their knowledge. What they thought, okay, now you're going to give them what it actually is. Or if they have it right, talk about it as a class. There's definitely a day or two of lesson that I've just kind of left up to anybody who takes these lessons and decides to use them. So that's going to be up to you on how you supplement the information that they gather from this. There's a couple options with that. You can either do this one and then do that right away on days like 3 and 4, or you can do lesson 2 and then come back to this. We'll get into lesson 2 and I'll mention that in the next video about how you kind of interchange that process around a little bit. But like I said, this is lesson 1, engaging students, getting them involved, building up, getting their ideas out, and you get to take a look at their prior knowledge. So if you do have any questions or comments on it, please post it on the comment section of this video. And the next one we have will be lesson 2, which is, again, assessing some more prior knowledge and starting to tie in these 2 lessons. So keep your eyes out for that one. Thanks for watching.